why did your parents do this to you? What was the motivation? And why do you think God allowed it to happen?
Well, I think that what I just addressed is the reason why God allowed it to happen and is allowing it. I know it is. And actually, I have been a religious scholar for over 20 years. I have double minors in Eastern religion, philosophy, focusing on Hinduism, and then went on to do other studies extended from there. I lived in India for years and all of that before going back to Christianity. So I do. Again, I'm not here to accuse anyone, but I can speak from my discernment and from knowing my parents my entire life and looking at my brother's case and things that I think that my parents got caught up in stuff that they shouldn't have gotten caught up in. And I think that, that resulted in something happening to my brother. Whether they were involved, knew that it was going to happen, or had a part in it happening because of their decisions or their affiliations. But I do know that there's more to the story than what they've said, and I know that they've spent 40 years retaliating against people, including using DCF to silence them.
Okay, you said something that sparked my interest, and I'm sorry, but I have to push a little bit, and if I'm pushing too far, tell me to stop, and I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna zip right here and shut up. But you said that it was some things that they got involved with, and that could have been a result of what happened to your brother. Did I catch that right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Can you elaborate on that and give us as much information as you can or is willing to about that?
Mm-hmm. I can give you from the court documents and everything that, my parents, they had lie detector tests, they had depositions, all of this in the case. And then they later went on to try to sue Sears department store for, the loss of my brother, where Sears actually was able to prove that my mom did not leave him for 3 or 6 minutes, like they said. And she actually left him for over 90 minutes. And then they actually interviewed, interrogated, gave lie detector tests to her significantly younger live-in lover at the time, James Campbell, who disclosed my parents' cocaine addiction, their promiscuity, domestic issues. Adam, he even says in his deposition that he wouldn't be surprised if Adam had run away because of, what was already going on. And a lot of the allegations in my case seem to be very similar to what seems to have been going on when Adam was alive, and perhaps my parents shouldn't have had Adam.
All right, so one more, and then I gotta let Merlin go because I'm sorry. Man, okay.
Buzzer, so, I need to give you these buttons.
Yeah, because I'm getting out of control. I'm getting out of control, but I promise y'all, I'm gonna get myself in order after this one. So, in your mind, do you think it could have been fame, money, which is I'm gonna put in the same fame and money, a debt, or I had it in my head, but what do you think? What do you think was the ultimate motivation? Because let me just say this: I'm assuming, and I could be wrong in my assumption, and maybe you got the same assumption. I'm assuming that, and no disrespect, that your parents, this was all intentional. That seems pretty obvious to me, but hey, I'm a little weird, so that I could be wrong. And if you deem this obvious, and as short as small of a sentence as you can, what do you think the main motivation was for doing this?
Well, again, there's different theories you can go down. And I think that, I do know that my father has always wanted to prove himself, if you will, to his father. We all have childhood trauma, and it really affects the rest of our lives. And I know that it was very important to him to always be accepted by his military father, when he was always more actually, esoteric and, hippie. My parents went to Woodstock and all of that. I'm not sure exactly how old my mother was at that point, because they met when, she was 16 and he was 22. But I think that my brother's case actually has been controversial for over 40 years. I'm not the first person by far to come forward and question things. It's been controversial in the area at the time, and since the rumor has been that it was a debt that my dad owed, that he was involved in drugs, and that my dad owed money and he refused to pay it, so they put a hit out on my brother. People question hits and think that it sounds ridiculous. You can look at my dad's DOJ speech in 2019 in front of the DOJ, where he even talks about NAMBLA and how they actually put a hit out on my life before I was even a year old. So that's, again, I grew up with bodyguards, aliases, hits on lives. We would get bomb threats for my dad, and I would walk in his closet. In the beginning would be bulletproof vests lined up, different things like that. So it could be a debt. It could have been that he was involved. My dad was also going back and forth at the time to the Bahamas, to Paradise Island, which goes back to Meyer Lansky, which would be CIA. And, the Bahamas is in line with Haiti and the islands. And, so again, I'm not an investigator. I want my children back. I want to save and protect children from our corrupt systemic issues within CPS. And I want my parents to have to deal with that. I think that they should be investigated. I think my brother's case should be reopened. We were all given a narrative of a beautiful little boy with a baseball bat and grieving parents that weren't going to let it be in vain. And no one really asked, because of the emotion behind it, what were these people, what were their lifestyles like? What were they involved in? What were they doing? And that's what I started asking myself once I started seeing therapists and realizing the abuse that I was experiencing my whole life, and that was then affecting my children and I. Which then I went no contact with them, and that's when things blew up as well.
Okay. If you were if you were accused of being a negligent or abusive parent, how is there not a warrant or a case for arrest or prosecution against you in the works or ever? I don't recall seeing one, and we went through looking for a lot of the court documents before we even found you, right? And we looked on the federal level, we looked on the local, we didn't find anything against you. When it came to the children, there were lots of things that you filed as wrongdoing, but how is it that they can say that the reason for doing it is on level with child abuse and no cases filed against you when it comes to actual child abuse? How is that possible?
Right, Marlon. How is that possible? And I was in the community developing a family learning farm at the time when my children were taken. I was out in the community. I was already doing protests, peaceful protests, and helping the community as well. So for 9 years, I've been a mother, right? And there's been no issues, no reports, no questions, no nothing. I'm actually praised for that. I'm actually known to help families and help mothers through birthing process and raising young families. So they did have me arrested. They had me falsely arrested the day before my trial for my children. My father did go and file a false report again, saying that I had filed false indigency paperwork, when you guys need to understand that there's 4 cases that they took out against me. And the way they did this was they started April 1st. They pulled me over out by our farm where no one would be, when I had my 3 children in the car, in I believe it was 4 or 5 unmarked police cars. They had only 2 of them had sheriff's vests on. That was it. And the rest were in street clothes. They told me it was a traffic stop, and they had me get out of the car and come around where I started filming. And it's this officer, Michael Dilks, who is best friends with the sheriff, Eric Flowers, who my father endorsed for sheriff. This is a good old boys system. So Dilks comes up. He says, come behind the car. I go behind the car. I'm surrounded by these men with my 3 children in the middle of nowhere, and they serve me a family court summons. You go to someone's door and you knock on it and you serve them. That's how you do it. This is completely outrageous. And so I left from there. They filed, that started on April Fool's Day. Then about 10 days later, they filed to take my home. And the same attorney, it represented the father that filed the family case, and then represents my father to force sale my home 10 days later. And then shortly after that, they did an emergency TICO order, taken to custody Zoom hearing, where my father got on and told the judge, Your Honor, she's holding those children hostage in that house. We have to get them out. So the judge immediately granted it, and they came and surrounded my home and took my 3 children on April 15th. And then the next day, animal control came to my home with an anonymous tip banging on the door that they had been told that there were 3 cats and 2 dogs being held hostage in my house. And then I sold my car to pay for my attorney. I was forced out of the home. This is what they do to discredit you and to bury you alive. And they know that my children are my life. They want to break me so that they can get a guardianship, and then they can get a conservatorship. And it also is financially based, if you ask me, in my opinion.
Okay. Whew. All right.
And I always say, does it sound crazy? Because it is. It's
no,
crazy.
It doesn't sound crazy, because I've heard it happen to regular people. I've also heard the opposite, where CPS will hear about something happening that's totally egregious and do nothing. And then a week later, the kid will be dead, and then no one will get prosecuted for the kid being dead, and no one gets any problem. And they'll find, like one kid in California, the kid he got abused, beat up. When they found the kid, he had been dead a few days in the house, in a little cubby hole, fed cat litter and all kinds of crap. And the parents are the only ones that paid the price. And meanwhile, CPS had been told a couple of days before, months in advance, that things were happening. Has your father or mother or your brothers ever offered to take the children in and rear them with their money and their finances, instead of putting them into a system that was not family oriented? Has they ever offered it to the courts? Hey, they're being abused there, so we will take them into our home and raise them as though they were our kids, because we have the money and the finances and the care to. Have they ever offered that?
No, that's what they're trying to claim now. They're saying we don't know what else to do, but exactly like you said, before going and making my children wards of the state.